In this hand, I called a pre-flop raise of $1 from the button after these two players had limped, expecting the pot to go single raised 5 ways most of the time. After Philip Dino and DeJans had limped. I flop open-ended with 8 outs to the nuts. And faced with a 75% pot raise and not closing the action, I'm going to fold. In this hand, I make a somewhat marginal isolation raise of a very loose limper. In general, I avoid hands with a dangler, but in this situation, it is profitable to isolate the loose passive player here. And I really don't have much of a hand on the flop, but getting 12, 13 to 1, something like that, I think it's okay to call with just top pair. And I am going to fold the turn here despite the phenomenal odds. With ace queen jack 8 on the button against a presumed very loose player, I am going to make a pot-sized isolation raise. I'm in position, and I should do very well against the sort of hands that he's limping in with. On the flop, I don't hit very much, and I'm going to check back. It's a very, very draw-heavy board. And it seems like an exercise in futility to try to bluff my loose opponent. When he leads the turn, there's really no choice but to fold. Despite my dangler, double suited jacks are more than enough to open from the cutoff with two pretty loose players in the blinds. And I flop a jack-high flush draw and a gut shot to go with my overpair. This is a pretty decent combo hand. And I'm going to raise here. I do all right against virtually anything except for a higher flush draw with a better made hand, something like 8-10 of hearts with ace-high hearts. And on the turn, I pick up a double gut shot, and there's so much money in the pot that I can easily call. Ace king 10, double suited. After a loose player limps in on the button, this is a great hand to raise a loose limper with. I have strong potential, the ability to make very powerful draws, high card value, and connectivity. This looks like a somewhat innocuous flop, so despite how connected it is, I am going to try to semi-bluff here with my king-high flush draw. My very loose passive opponent calls, and I do have some notes on him here. He leads out the turn, which doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Maybe he picked up two pair, but I think maybe he's bluffing, and I am going to shove on him. If he does have two pair, my equity should be pretty high. If he took this sort of bizarre line with 4-5, then, well, that's too bad for me. But he ends up folding. Ace, Queen, 10-8 from the first position in a six-handed game. Maybe this was a little too aggressive of an open. But I am going to call the 3-bet, although a little worried about being really crushed by the 3-better by something like aces. But I've got this call here at least to help compensate me a little bit. And perhaps this player will call as well. And on this flop, I'm simply going to check and fold. And the 3-better did in fact have a very powerful hand, although he cannot dodge the open-ended runout. Looking back on this overpair flush draw gut shot hand, you'll see that despite the fact that my opponent did have the dominating flush draw, I was still a favorite because I've got his straight draw dominated and I do have the best made hand. So he's drawing to a heart or an ace. In this hand, I checked my option in the big blind and flopped the 6-high straight in a 4-way limped pot. And I'm just going to check and fold this hand with this fairly powerful double-suited ace-king hand. I am going to take a flop out of position, but I must fold, of course, on this board. This somewhat disconnected rundown with a queen-high suit and some decent high card value is enough to take a flop in position against a fairly aggressive opener. On the flop, he leads out full pot, and I do have a player still to act behind me. I'm going to take one card off with 8 outs to the nuts and some other potential as well with a backdoor flush draw and potential redraw to a higher straight. I'm not going to try to steal this pot 3-way. And on this river, of course, I have to fold. King, Queen, Jack, 8. Opening from the hijack. And taking it down.